What are the fundamental brain mechanisms that underlie our ability to be conscious at all? And we can think of this, at least to a first approximation, as a scale from being completely unconscious, as if you're in a coma or under general anesthesia, to being awake, alert, and fully conscious as you are now. And there's various states in between, being drowsy, being mildly sedated, and so on. What's important is that while being conscious and being awake often go together, this is not always the case. For instance, when you are dreaming, you are asleep, but you're having conscious experiences, the conscious experiences of your dreams. And on the other side of this diagram, there are pathological states, like the vegetative state, where physiologically you will go through sleep-wake cycles, but there is nobody at home. There is no consciousness happening. So what are the specific mechanisms that underlie being conscious and not simply being physiologically awake? Well, there are a number of possibilities. Is it the number of neurons? Well, actually, probably not. There are more neurons in your cerebellum, this bit at the back of your brain, than in the rest of your brain put together. In fact, there are about 4 times more neurons in your cerebellum than in the rest of your cortex. But if you have damage to your cerebellum, yeah, you'll have some problems with coordination and other things, some cognitive problems, but you won't lose consciousness. It's not just the number of neurons. It doesn't seem to be any particular region, in fact. There are regions that if you suffer damage, you will permanently lose consciousness. The intralaminar nuclei in the thalamus, deep inside the brain. But these seem to be more like on-off switches than actual generators of conscious experience. It's not even neural activity, at least not simple kinds of neural activity. Your brain is still highly active during unconscious states, during dreamless sleep. And even if your brain is highly synchronized, one of the first theories of consciousness was it depended on neurons firing in synchrony with each other. If your brain is too synchronized, you will lose consciousness, and this happens in states of absence epilepsy. What seems to be the case is that being conscious at all depends on how different brain regions talk to each other in specific ways. And this is some groundbreaking work by Marcello Massimini in Milan about 10 years ago. And what he did here was he stimulated the cortex of the brain with a brief pulse of electromagnetic energy using a technique called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. And then he used EEG, electroencephalography, to listen to the brain's echo. It's a little bit like banging on the brain and listening to its electrical response. And what he noticed when you do this, you can see on the left is asleep and on the right is awake. And this is very much slowed down. When you stimulate the brain in a sleep condition, there is still a response, there's still an echo, but the echo stays very localized to the point of stimulation. It doesn't travel around very much, it doesn't last very long. But when you stimulate a conscious brain, there's a spatiotemporally complex response. This echo bounces around all over the cortex in very interesting ways. What's more, the complexity of this echo can be quantified. You can apply some simple algorithms to describe how complex, how rich this pattern of interactivity is. This is also from the Milan group. And what they've done here is they basically look at the echo as it moves around the brain, and they see the extent to which you could describe it, the minimum description length, how much can you compress the image of that echo, in much the same way that algorithms make compressed files from digital images in your phone. And they come up with an index called the perturbation complexity index. And what you find is you now have a number that you can attach to how conscious you are. And this is, I think, really intriguing because it's a first step towards having an actual measurement of conscious level. This graph on the bottom shows this measure applied to a variety of conscious states, ranging from pathological conscious states, like the vegetative state where there is no consciousness at all the way through locked-in syndrome and then healthy waking. And you can immediately see that techniques like this might already have clinical value in diagnosing what potential for consciousness patients might have after severe brain injury. Now at Sussex, we're continuing work along these lines. We actually look, instead of bashing on the brain with this sharp pulse of energy, we want to see whether we can get something similar just by recording the spontaneous activity of the brain. So we look at spontaneous dynamics from, in this case, waking state and anesthesia. This is work with my PhD student, Michael Shartner and Adam Barrett. We measure its complexity, and indeed, we find that we can distinguish different levels of consciousness just by the spontaneous activity of the brain. In a way, this isn't that surprising because we know various things change, like the balance of different frequencies of your brain activity changes when you lose consciousness. But this doesn't have to do with that. This is independent of that. There's something specific that is being detected by these changes in complexity. More recently, we've applied the same measures to sleep, in this case taking advantage with colleagues in Milan of recordings taken from directly within the human cerebral cortex. These are implanted electrodes. And we see much the same story. If you compare where the two arrows are, you compare the complexity of wakeful rest and early non-REM sleep, where you're not dreaming very much, you see that complexity falls a great deal. What's interesting here is if you compare wakeful rest to REM sleep, where people will often report dreams if you wake them up, the level of complexity is very much as it is during the wakeful state. There's something else going on here, which is that the complexity in the frontal part of the brain seems to be higher than in other parts of the brain. That's something we still don't understand fully yet. I just wanted to give you something hot off the press, so to speak, which is we've also been applying these measures now to data taken from people under the influence of psychedelic drugs, psilocybin, ketamine, and LSD. And what we find, at least in our hands to start with here, is that the level of complexity actually increases as compared to the baseline state, which is not something we've seen before in any other application of these measures. So what's important about this way of looking at things is that it's grounded in a theory that tries to explain why certain sorts of brain dynamics go along with being conscious. And put very simply, the idea is this, and it goes back to Giulio Tononi and Gerald Edelman, people that I went to work with in America about 18 years ago. The idea is very simple. Consciousness is extremely informative. Every conscious experience you have, or have had, or will have, is different from every other conscious experience you have had, are having, or will have. Even the experience of pure darkness rules out a vast repertoire of alternative possible experiences that you could have, or might have in the future. So there's a huge amount of information for the organism in any conscious experience. At the same time, every experience that you have is highly integrated. Every conscious scene is experienced as all of a piece, as bound together. We don't experience colors and shapes separately in any way. So conscious experiences at the level of phenomenology combine these properties. They are, on the one hand, highly informative, composed of many different parts. On the other, bound together in a unified whole. And this motivates us to search for mathematical measures which have the same property, which are neither lacking in information. On the left, you see a system which is all connected together, so it can't enter very many different states. On the right is a system which is completely dissociated, so that it can enter states, but it's not a single system. We want measures that track this middle ground of systems that that combine both integration and differentiation. And a number of these measures now exist. There are some equations here, which we can talk about later, if you like, that try to target this middle ground. And time will tell whether, by applying these more phenomenologically grounded measures, we come up with even more precise, practical measures of consciousness. Now, why is this business of measurement important? And I want to make a general point here, which is that if you're trying to naturalize a phenomenon which seems mysterious, the ability to measure it is usually one of the most important steps you can take. And we've seen numerous examples of this. The history of our understanding of heat and temperature is one very good example. Here's an early thermometer from the 18th century which used the expansion of air. But of course there are many problems in generating a reliable thermometer and a scale of temperature. If you don't already have fixed points, and if you don't know what heat is, you get trapped in a kind of vicious circle that took a long time to break out of. But people did break out of this, and the development of thermometers catalyzed our understanding of heat from being something that flowed in and out of objects to being something that was identical to a physical property, the mean molecular kinetic energy of molecules in a substance. And having that concept of heat now allows us to talk about temperature far beyond the realms of human experience. We can talk about the temperature on the surface of the sun in a sensible way. We can talk about the temperature of interstellar space close to absolute zero. None of these things make any sense in our phenomenological experience of hot and cold. So this brings me to my first take-home message. Measurement is important, and consciousness, conscious level, depends on a complex balance of differentiation and integration in brain dynamics, reflecting the fact that conscious experiences themselves are both highly informative and always integrated. Now, when we are conscious of something. So what are the brain mechanisms that determine the content of consciousness? And the hero for this part of the story is the German physicist and physiologist Hermann von Helmholtz. And he proposed the idea that the brain is a kind of prediction machine, that what we see, hear, and feel are nothing other than the brain's best guess about the causes of sensory inputs.
Hello, I'm Allison. I have read a lot about neuroscience since 2003 and is fond of it. In 2016, I discovered a great novel on neuroscience, the unique book I'd like to share with you on this channel here for 3 reasons. 1. It shows you an original approach to neuroscience that has been never done before. 2. It's quite well written, you're totally captivating. That's an amazing thriller. And 3. It is based on a serious and true study about electromagnetic harassment. I highly recommend you this book entitled Neuroscience, Crime and Corruption, White Mind Distortion for 2 main reasons. 1. It deals with neuroscience in a totally different way as usual. The innovative form used is a novel. And I'm pretty sure that you have never ever read a novel about neuroscience, but articles and studies. The second reason is the quality of the book. Well, it's pretty good written and the story is captivating. You can click on the link here to know more about the story, which is a thriller. What I can tell you is I couldn't help myself reading when I started. I was so in. The characters are incredibly amazing, and the story is so unbelievable. What an experience. So if you want to know more about this book, and I think I'm gonna make more videos like this, just click here. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and share this video. Bye.